It is my pleasure to introduce Pat Manning, the 2016 American Historical Association president, in one of the most cherished traditions of the American Historical Association, the presidential address. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Manning to you this evening. I was schooled with the idea that when you do an introduction, people are there to see the person you're introducing, not to hear what you have to say. So I will keep my remarks fairly brief. Pat Manning is a figure that has explored many different venues, not just in history, but in intellectual life in general. He is that most exceptional of breeds, a native Californian who was born during World War II to a working class family and grew up with an emphasis on scholarship and intellectual life. He started out as a chemist at Caltech, and then for some inexplicable reason turned to the study of history, which brought him to the University of Wisconsin-Madison and to the study of African history. There he studied with Philip Curtin and with many other distinguished faculty members, and began a lifelong project of work on African history and the history of Francophone Africa in particular. Now, it was not until 1984, 15 years after obtaining his PhD, that Pat joined the Department of History and African American Studies at Northeastern University as a tenure-track assistant professor. And they then spent time publishing on a variety of subjects and producing, just before he came to Northeastern, his first book, Slavery, Colonialism, and Economic Growth in Dahomey, 1640-1960, published by Cambridge University Press in 1982. For Pat, research of the Francophone and continental African slave trade and its subsequent impact on African economic development marked the beginning of a lifelong intellectual journey to understand the global past in order to foreground African experiences. And I think one of the most sort of engaging aspect of Pat's work is the fact that he has seen African history as not just a subfield of the historical profession, but as an essential central part of the human story. As he wrote, quote, "I want to give particular emphasis to the value of the work done by African slaves in the Americas, in Africa, and in the Orient, because the tradition of racist ideology in the last 150 years has done so much to deny their importance in constructing the world we live in, as well as to deny that the underdevelopment of Africa resulted in part from their forced migration. The very term Western civilization, which we use to describe the continents of Europe, North and sometimes South America, reflects this denial of Africa's role in the modern world." In his most recent works, Pat has systematically demonstrated the discrepancy between the importance of Africa and people of African descent in shaping the modern world and the inadequate attention they have received in academic discussions of this sweeping historical process. As he put it, quote, "The history of Africans and people of African descent, a complex story in itself, lies in the center of the history of all humanity. But the main interpretation of the modern world history gives brief references to the experience of black people discussing enslavement, emancipation to colonization, and civil rights campaigns, but stops short of situating these references in the central narratives of constructing the modern economy, national identity, governance, or knowledge and culture." With this understanding of the history of African peoples of African descent, it is logical that Pat would then branch out into a systematic study and exploration of world history. He began as an African economic and social historian, but by the 1990s had clearly established himself as a world historian and somebody that looked at not just the role of Africa in the world, but the role of the world, the shape of the world that Africa had helped shape. Since the 1990s, at a moment when world history as a discipline was in its nascent stage, Pat has concerned himself with legitimating it as a field of teaching and research. In posing the question, what is world history? Pat himself cautions that the definition of world history is open to debate, yet its rapid development as a field of study since the early 1990s attests to its legitimacy, workability, and wide appeal as an academic field. So, since the 1990s, Pat has published numerous work, and as a leading world historian has also applied considerable effort to institutional development, program building, student advising, and consultation with various groups. The PhD program in world history at Northeastern University, which he created in 1994, along with the World History Center and World History Resource Center, was the first such program in American higher education. Pat was the committee chair for 14 PhD students there and advisor to many others. Since moving to the University of Pittsburgh as Andrew W. Mellon Professor of World History in 2005, he has served as primary advisor for 5 PhD students and as a committee member for a dozen more. With support from the NEH, he created the World History Network Incorporated, and after almost 20 years devoted to the study and expansion of world history, Pat founded at the University of Pittsburgh the institutional support he felt the field deserved. With funding from the Dietrich School of Arts and Sciences and supported by the University of Pittsburgh's Department of History, Pat became the founder and first director of its World History Center. Under its leadership from 2008 to 2015, the center grew into the foremost institution for research, graduate study, and national and international collaboration in the field of global history. So he's been a very busy man, and we are privileged tonight to hear his reflections on world history, and also privileged to celebrate the fact that in addition to all his other labors, he has found time to serve as president of the American Historical Association. So without further ado, it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome Professor Patrick W. Manning.
Thank you, Tyler, for that very generous introduction. I offer you my best wishes, Tyler, as you take on the gavel of the presidency in a day. And I also offer my best wishes to Vicki Reese for her service as AHA president the previous year. In addition, I express my appreciation to Executive Director Jim Grossman and Deputy Director Dana Schaefer for their guidance and support, and to the members of the AHA Council for their skilled deliberations. The nominating committee, in the mystery of its process, put me on the ballot 2 or 3 years ago, and I was honored to win an election. During my presidency, I've sought to focus attention on teachers at all levels, on research in the innovative fields of African and world history, on expanding the international connections of the American historical profession, and on learning how the American Historical Review can select a path of scholarly leadership for the next generation, and on interdisciplinary approaches, as I will emphasize here. The year of presidency is over in an instant, and at the end it provides this opportunity to articulate a vision of historical studies. So here goes. In the United States today, but not only in the United States, the contrasts among the wealthy, the poor, and those in between are growing and gaining increasing attention, not since the days of the robber barons of American industry at the opening of the 20th century have small numbers of wealthy people gained such economic power and social prominence. The growth of the economy's financial sector means that its profit rates and personal incomes greatly exceed those elsewhere in the economy. The economic crisis of 2008-2009, provoked by instability in financial markets and bringing deep losses in corporate earnings and high levels of unemployment, reinforced the popular impression that a crisis in inequality was brewing, since the big firms, and especially the financial firms, were bailed out by government allocation of tax money gathered from the general public. French economist Thomas Piketty had already been working on the issue of inequality for over a decade, along with American economist Emmanuel Saez. Their 2001 analysis of the top 10% of Americans' individual earnings as a portion of total U.S. earnings led to wide circulation of graphs like that shown here, showing a peak in concentration amongst the wealthy in 1928, low levels of inequality from the 1940s to 1980, and a rapid rise in inequality thereafter. To what degree is rising inequality a global phenomenon rather than one focused in the United States? Piketty's 2014 interpretation, entitled Capital in the 21st Century, expanded the argument to the Atlantic world's big economies. He argued that the increase in inequality is an automatic result of economic forces independent of human will. The Great Depression and World War II reversed the previous accumulation of wealth by destroying capital, but the growth of capital and inequality resumed its steady advance from 1980. Still, most of the world's population living in less affluent countries remained outside of this analysis. Today's economic literature focuses heavily on economic inequality in contemporary times and mostly in relatively wealthy countries. Within these limits, many excellent books and articles of economic analysis have recently appeared. I discuss some of them in the written version of this talk. Economists generally appear to believe that significant inequality is inevitable in society, though most acknowledge that it can reach levels that are excessive. Three palliatives for excessive inequality have varying degrees of support among economists: taxation, regulation, and economic growth. Piketty and other economists with social democratic outlooks support taxation and regulation as means to limit excessive holdings in financial portfolios. Opposition to taxation and regulation comes especially from wealthy individuals, big institutions, but also from important segments of the general population. More widely supported is a focus on economic growth, an argument that growth can reduce economic inequality by bringing a higher level of income for all, enabling those with lower incomes to catch up to others without reducing the incomes of the wealthy. At least since the mid-20th century, economic growth has been a principal policy objective for most national governments, for international organizations, and for business firms. Similarly, growth is high on the agenda of general populations concerned about their own well-being. Now, the rising concern about economic inequality has added fuel to the fire of demand for more economic growth. Those who desire to resolve inequality through economic growth, however, tend to assume that growth itself is unproblematic. Further, and perhaps more significantly, the focus on growth as a solution to inequality ignores the current crisis of environmental degradation. In contrast to this economics-only approach, I emphasize a world historical approach to inequality, relying not only on economics but on data and analysis from history, the social sciences, the humanities, and the natural sciences. To explicate this world historical approach, I'll introduce here the objectives, methods, and arguments of this ambitious but I think timely plan for historical research. Inequality from this point of view is a question not only of income and wealth, but also of cultural hierarchies, social discrimination, political disenfranchisement, discrepancies in power, and the disparities resulting from varying conditions of health and climatic experience. The proposal for a world historical research campaign on inequality may seem to be an enormous and perhaps impossible scale, but I believe that it is both feasible and necessary. The parallel issue of climate change is of interest not only because it may have an impact on human inequality, but also because discoveries about the climate system bring lessons of great relevance for the study of human inequality. Global climate studies began with relatively small-scale research, but the implications of that initial research subsequently led to larger-scale studies and major advances in theory and in the collection of data, both contemporary and historical. For climate, the key initial example came from the study of atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide as measured at Mauna Loa Observatory on Hawaii's second highest peak, beginning in 1958. The results of the analysis, as shown on this slide, revealed a rapid and ongoing rise in levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide, which raised concerns about the possible impact of increased CO2 on global temperature. As these estimates were verified over the years, they encouraged broader studies of global warming, including the development of general models of climate and systematic collection of data on temperature and humidity all around the world and for times reaching far into the past. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, created in 1988 by two United Nations organizations, issued its first assessment report in 1990 and has reported regularly since, largely confirming the initial findings. Some of the results, as shown in this slide, show that subsequent research, including various techniques, traced atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide over 2 centuries earlier and confirmed the accelerating growth of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So this part over here in red, this is the same material as was shown previously, the Mauna Loa observations, and these observations here in blue come from cores from Antarctica, ice cores. The subsequent advances of studies on climate, which have created extraordinary new knowledge over the course of 30 years, raise the hope that an equivalent advance is possible for social scientific knowledge on inequality. By analogy, one can argue that such initial insightful studies in economic inequality as the first work of Piketty and Saez may have launched the expansion of knowledge on the dynamics of human society. The success of research on climate change, paralleled by success in genomic research, suggests that it may be possible to invest equal amounts of energy into social research. We can hope to learn more about the processes of change, both positive and negative, within human society as a whole. Contemporary human society faces two great crises. The crisis of inequality, a matter of human society, is best addressed through the social sciences. The environmental crisis, a matter of the earth as a whole, is best addressed through the natural sciences. In addition, the shifts in the natural world, yielding to pressure from the expansion of human society, reveal the disequilibrium of our planetary equation. Balancing the equation, or understanding the collision of humanity and nature, will require the cooperation of all fields of knowledge. My purpose here is to spur intellectual action addressing the most neglected element of the equation, our understanding of inequality in human society. A project is already underway to build a world historical data resource and focus it on the question of the source and transformation of inequality in society worldwide during the past 5 centuries. The Collaborative for Historical Information and Analysis, or CHIA, has pursued the design and implementation of world historical research since 2011. CHIA is a multi-institutional, multidisciplinary organization. Headquartered at the World History Center at the University of Pittsburgh, it includes affiliates at several other universities. Its rationale is that the policies now being implemented by governments and international organizations need to be based on knowledge of global and historical social structures and dynamics. In seeking to assemble that knowledge, CHIA focuses on social science analysis and on close collaboration with information scientists and natural scientists. It's one of a number of groups that have been exploring large-scale analysis of human society, struggling for funding but persistently setting their sights higher. Indeed, CHIA has now helped to form a more inclusive group known as Big Data in Human Society that is addressing similar issues through a still broader collaboration. The CHIA project has articulated an encompassing perspective on how to learn about the crises facing humanity through collaboration amongst disciplines. The natural sciences have developed theory and data for modeling the material world at scales from the subatomic to the universal. They have significantly advanced study of the environmental crisis in what I call Project 1. The social sciences work on issues in human society, especially at the community level, with discrete data and discrete analysis. They should expand the scale of their work and take leadership in analyzing social inequality in what I call Project 2. The humanities explore perceptions and representation across numerous media, from the individual to the global level, and are achieving dramatic advances in digital representation. The information sciences draw on continuing advances to provide steadily improving techniques for analyzing and representing information in many fields. In fact, all of these academic domains overlap significantly. Thus, the humanities and the social sciences overlap intimately in the field of history. To select a specific example, the history of civil rights in the United States can best be understood by combining the humanistic study of debates on race and culture with the social scientific study of economic inequality and political mobilization. Similarly, economic and environmental degradation must be of concern to social scientists, even though it includes issues beyond the usual frontiers of social science. Here, as a reminder, is a view of the Earth developed by ecologists who initially divided the planet into several spheres. The labels for the spheres give the terminology and show this nice ecological model of the planet. From the standpoint of human society, growth has been the main pattern during recent generations. And social groups find it logical to press for its continuation. For 2 centuries, humanity has achieved unprecedented growth in population, industrial output, food supplies, health conditions, literacy, scientific knowledge, communication, and more. But from the standpoint of the Earth as a whole, one sees that the human system has become so large and influential that its relentless growth is disturbing structures and relationships throughout the planet's ecology. Humanity has already captured much of the biosphere, especially the mammals, birds, fish, and cereals that we use for food. We're heating up the atmosphere with greenhouse gases. We've polluted and warmed the hydrosphere, threatening the maritime species that form the basis of the food chain. And the geosphere now rumbles in response to our new technique of fracking for natural gas. Here's a revised view of ecological spheres, now giving more attention to human intervention in every sphere. The picture is more complicated and not as pretty. Ecologists have been developing the notion of the Anthropocene, a new geological era that may recently have opened, in which humanity governs change throughout the terrestrial system. Extinction of species at all levels could interfere with food supplies up and down the food chain. So here are some metaphoric views of Earth in the Anthropocene. Climate patterns are already becoming erratic, threatening to return to the great fluctuations that had prevailed for millions of years, up until the remarkably stable and beneficial Holocene climate of the past 10,000 years. The changes we have seen so far in rising sea levels and melting ice caps are small indeed in comparison with the fluctuations in climate before the Holocene. The ultimate research objective is what I call Project 3, analysis drawing on all fields of knowledge to explain the interaction between human inequality and environmental degradation. Only through cross-disciplinary collaboration can we learn of the trajectory of Earth as propelled by these colliding crises. Only then will we have the knowledge to propose the steps to mitigate their effects, somehow gathering support across social lines for what will surely be difficult decisions. Work has already begun on Project 3 as well, especially in the natural sciences. But real success in understanding these human-natural interactions will come only when we have substantial results from both Project 1 on the environment and Project 2 on inequality. Meanwhile, I believe that the crisis within humanity, the crisis of inequality, must be the immediate concern of social scientists and humanities scholars. It should be treated as a crisis, first because of recurring social outcries echoing around the globe at all social levels. These uprisings include successive waves of decolonization, periodic clashes over gender relations, struggles over racial, ethnic, and confessional divisions, and populist anger across economic, national, and religious lines, each pitting the haves and the have-nots against each other. Widespread individual oppression and deprivation contrast sharply with extreme levels of privilege. Contemporary globalization appears to combine local patterns of inequality into ever more extreme degrees of global inequality. If indeed global inequality is expanding, it brings an increase in aggregate opportunity cost. That is, the potential innovations and productivity that are foregone because so many individuals are prevented from developing their gifts. Discrepancies in power mean that small but influential groups make self-serving decisions without considering the external effects, making decisions for their own benefit that neglect the interests of society generally. Demonstrable examples of the neglect of external effects include persistent inefficiency in food production and distribution systems, and the reluctance of governments and large corporations to undertake action that would limit greenhouse gas emissions to halt the rise in atmospheric temperatures. All of these points, however, will remain arguments rather than confirmed observations on inequality until large-scale research is conducted to confirm or refute them. The study of human inequality, Project 2, is the most immediate need in social research and one in which historians will be most fully involved. Such a project requires historical data, techniques of documentation, theories linking many types of social experience, and methods for aggregating community data at levels up to the global. The problem is that social sciences are the scholarly domain most in need of new methods, perhaps because of the difficulty of breaking through the obstacles. These disciplines continue to rely on inherited techniques, using tabular data held in discrete and isolated files. They work with theories that remain in the silos of economics, sociology, politics, and anthropology. We need research on difference that ranges across scales, from the familial to the global, across characteristics, from the physical to the cultural, distinguishing a causation by human agency or by natural factors, and tracing the effects of inequality on human society and the earthly environment. So far, studies of these issues remain few in number. The social sciences have benefited from some important results of natural science research on questions of social inequality. Most importantly, as the human genome was decoded, the results confirmed that it is individual characteristics, not group or racial characteristics, that tell us most about human variety. That is, if all persons within families or nationalities were very much alike and significantly different from other families or nationalities, it would make sense to interpret history and society in terms of bloodlines or races, rather than in terms of individual experience and contingent relationships. But genetic analysis has shown consistently greater genetic variation within population than among populations, so that the notion of distinctive racial or class groups has been rejected decisively. With regard to intelligence, geneticists see intelligence as arising from a wide variety of locations on the genome, so that it is too complex, too variegated to be inherited along simple family lines. To analyze inequality in all of human society for the past 500 years, Project 2 is a truly immense task. Yet it is a task worth taking on because of the benefits it may bring in understanding inequality, and because a successful advance of this research should lay the groundwork for further analysis of global-scale human dynamics. The design of the research for a historical analysis of global inequality must be comprehensive. The framework owes a great deal to the logic of world historical research, of which I cite my own recent review. It must be general in its attack on multiple issues, wide-ranging in its concern for global interactions, and energetic in collecting enough data for empirical analysis. The spatial framework for this study of inequality encompasses the whole of the Earth and the whole global population for the period since 1500. Its fully global spatial scope is a matter of principle in that we assume all segments of human society interact. In contrast, the temporal scope of the study, the last half millennium, is a practical choice based on the availability of data. The era of global navigation and overseas colonization, beginning in roughly 1500, brought a great expansion in information available on societies worldwide. This leaves us with a problem to which I shall return on how to understand inequality in the period before 1500, since it's plausible that earlier developments in human society were also important to forming configurations of inequality. The topical framework of this study extends to multiple dimensions of inequality, especially economic, political, social, health, and climate. The study is intended to account for issues of inequality at several levels of social aggregation, addressing gender, family, community, political regimes, geographic regions, and the global level. To guide the research within this framework, the project is focused on a set of hypotheses reflecting the initial questions and assumptions. In sequence, the hypotheses address the sources of inequality, both human and natural, the dynamics of inequality emerging from the various types of social change. I identify three main types, and the relationships between inequality and social welfare. So to proceed with each of these three main categories. What is the source of inequality? Does it come from human nature? Our group hypothesizes that human inequality is principally socially constructed. At an intuitive level, one need only compare the elaborate complexity of human inequality with the simpler forms of inequality in other species to conclude that humans' conscious social behavior is the source of most of its inequality. Such socially constructed inequality is passed from one generation to the next through acts of teaching, learning, and remembering, but also through the influences of social institutions in governance, production, and war. On the other hand, other aspects of inequality may come from the natural influence of biological evolution, inheritance, in which the genome passes on certain patterns of aggression and familial behavior. Thus, we can postulate two sorts of human nature: socially constructed human nature, resulting from conscious decisions that become widely approved, socially reproduced, and can contribute to complexity in society, and biologically inherited human nature, resulting from the slow process of genetic evolution that governs humans' most basic behavior. Socially constructed inequality originates primarily in human decisions to categorize. This conscious construction of social groups through categorization has generated inequalities from early times to the present. The resulting institutions and ideologies, such as discrimination on the basis of race, gender, religion, and ethnicity, have initiated much or most of the economic inequality that exists today within and between national units. As a symbol for the social construction of inequality, I found it useful to consider the construction of walls. Walls along borders today, walls built in this millennium, including the Great Wall of China, and earlier borders on smaller scales, because such walls simultaneously draw upon and create designations of social inequality. The natural sources of inequality fall into two main categories: endogenous, rising from within humanity, and exogenous, arising in the environment surrounding humans. By endogenous natural inequality, I mean the biologically inherited human nature proposed in some theories to explain gender inequality, family hierarchy, and social violence. The dynamics of socially constructed inequality work on at least three levels. The first and most localized of the three, the conscious construction of inequality by individuals and groups, got a solid start as fully articulated speech took form some 80,000 years ago, enabling early speakers to add social categories such as division of labor and identification of priests to the biological categories of the natural world. Beyond the level of individual contributions, inequality fluctuates with generational dynamics, where generations average just under 30 years in length. Generational rise and fall takes place at the levels of family, community, dynasty, and state. The third level of social construction is that of emergent social processes, which create additional dynamics of inequality. Over time, the consequences of conscious human agency have led to the unconscious emergence of larger scale processes. Language itself is one such example. Agriculture and urbanism are two more important examples. Industrialization and nationhood are recent instances of emergent social processes transforming, perhaps unexpectedly, human society. If there were time, these could be illustrated in detail. A further nexus of contending hypotheses addresses inequality and social welfare. One may ask most broadly, what is the social function of inequality? Inequality is commonly seen as a resultant of social processes, but it is also posed as a causal factor, leading to either social advance or decline. On one side, contributors to the economics literature have argued, at least until very recently, that society becomes less inequitable as it becomes more advanced in economic complexity. Yet this hypothesis also encounters debate, in that while warfare often involves a heavy concentration of resources, it typically results in more destruction of resources than in productivity. The next steps in research design, beyond the framework and hypotheses just surveyed, proceed with the collection and processing of data and bring to light the major challenges enabled in the management of data to carry out the intended global analysis. The pervasiveness of these technical and organizational difficulties helps explain why social scientists have been slow to take on analysis at the global level. There are 7 distinctive challenges that must be met in order to permit effective information-based analysis of human society, and here are concise references to each of them. First, it's collecting data. Historical data must be collected and digitized. The original data are in analog formats as text, tables, images. They're in multiple languages, in scripts and formats. All of this needs to be digitized and gathered in one space for global analysis. Documenting data. In large-scale historical research, data do not speak for themselves. They must be documented with precision and thoroughness. Linking discrete data sets. The most technically difficult of the challenges in global social science research is linking and aggregating tabular data sets that are currently set in isolated, separate data sets that cannot simply be added together. Estimating missing data. This task becomes steadily more important as one moves to earlier times and to regions where written documents are less common. Collaboration among researchers. Collaborative infrastructure enables researchers in multiple scholarly domains to exchange information efficiency and develop shared insights. And it's easy to talk about cross-disciplinary collaboration, but putting it into practice involves years of working together and carrying out lots of arguments and resolving them. Different orders of data. Yet another challenge is that high-speed computation is necessary to analyze multiple orders of data, nominal, ordinal, and interval, using the latest available algorithms. And finally, analysis. Analysis is undertaken to consider interaction amongst groups of variables that have been individually described as summarized above. Two great crises in knowledge and policy confront us: environmental degradation, advancing incrementally and threateningly, is a crisis because it reveals unmistakable evidence that we are moving towards catastrophe, catastrophic change that could come in our own lifetime. Inequality is a crisis because it's a question of how humans treat one another. Few have any idea what to do about it. Will our differences undermine global society and the earthly environment? Or will we be able to draw on the full reservoir of human intelligence and make common decisions for our mutual interest? Here's a metaphoric parallel. Recalling a time 66 million years ago, the T-Rex and Triceratops debate. In the background, a great meteor heads for Yucatan. The meteor is actually labeled income inequality, but I'm twisting it a bit. Where the meteor will throw up dust, bringing generations of winter. The T-Rex argues, "I'm sure I'll be okay, but you're screwed." The difference this time is that the threat comes not out of the heavens, but out of our own blindness to the complications of our own success. While natural science research explores knowledge for its own sake, one may also characterize science as having worked energetically for the past 2 centuries to manipulate nature, exploiting it for the benefit of human society. Advances in natural science have enabled humans to expand our control of other spheres of the environment and to bring about growth in the human population, economy, and society. But, especially with the rising threat of atomic warfare, natural scientists have turned as well to considering the negative implications of advances in science and technology. Natural science disciplines are now reconsidering interactions within their fields and with human society, rethinking the overall trajectory of the planet. The social sciences, in contrast, have taken a narrower approach to their subject matter. Social sciences work at levels from families and communities up to nations. They do compare national experiences, but they do not have a strong tradition of analyzing human society as a whole, nor a deep tradition of exploring human-natural interactions. Environmental history and health history have grown impressively in significance in recent years, but their approach has not been generally adopted. Social scientists, while increasingly ready to speculate on global historical and social configurations, have devoted little energy to actually documenting humanity as a whole. Similarly, they have left to natural sciences the task of exploring the interaction between human society and the natural world. My main point in sum is to call for a large scale of involvement of social sciences in the Project 2 research on the global crisis of human inequality. How will historians be able to contribute to the grand effort of Project 2? Most will not be willing or able to turn on a dime and suddenly focus their energies on world historical research. What then can they realistically do to advance the study of global structures? The easiest and arguably most valuable step is for historians and other social scientists to submit data files to public archives where they can be incorporated into larger studies. In particular, I urge scholars to submit historical data files to the CHIA archive using the CHIA Open Data Submission link. So here's the CHIA data file overall, and right here is the submit button that leads one at the next stage to the Open Data Submission link. This link enables contributors to submit historical files of any sort, tabular data, text files, images, or mixes of these, large files or small, for inclusion in the CHIA Historical Archive. David Ruvalo, the CHIA project manager, is there to assist you and answer your questions. In addition, other public archives will accept data files, especially tabular data. One purpose is to collect data specifically on inequality. Another is to help historians develop the habit of submitting their data to an open access archive, which can contribute to other historical advances. Only when social scientists systematically contribute digitized data to public archives will real momentum develop in support of Project 2, the study of human inequality. So if you have a data set that you're not sure if it's relevant, assume it's relevant. Next, historians can contribute to editing and linking the available data in any of numerous ways. The CHIA archive will facilitate crowdsourcing by volunteer historians who can help edit and document submitted files working from remote locations. Following a process that has worked in other fields, professional and amateur scholars, including graduate and undergraduate students, can be highly productive in documenting data by space, time, topics, and the details of their linkage, and by estimating and simulating missing data. Those with programming skills can join in the linkage and aggregation of discrete data sets so that we can document the factors contributing to inequality from local levels to continental and imperial interactions. The scholars who participate in these levels of work, contributing data, editing data, and linking data sets, can constitute a community of skilled researchers able to make the case for the feasibility and the relevance of this large-scale research, and to make the case for expanded institutional support and funding. Once data are collected and documented, as summarized in this schematic of CHIA infrastructure, scholars can systematically analyze the varying levels of monetary income, categories of gender and ethnicity, and health conditions. Attention to theories and debates in the literature will help identify which data are of highest priority for collection, editing, and linking. Small-scale studies of social interaction or of human-natural interaction may give insights that can be applied more broadly. Further, historians can be alert in identifying and scrutinizing assumptions underlying social science analysis. Not everyone will be able to perform all of these steps, but formal recognition that this is a common project will help build the links. Of the various social sciences, history is well placed to reach out and explore across disciplinary lines, giving leadership in this task to scholars more generally. The strength of history is the relatively cosmopolitan nature of its literature, which gathers information and offers interpretation across a wide range of places, times, and social situations. On the one hand, history, poised in the overlap of the humanities and the social sciences, can balance studies of culture and social change in developing a sense of how the contemporary human system functions and how to enable it to face the crisis of inequality. On the other hand, historians with their cross-disciplinary interests can link the dynamics of society to the human aspects of biological and physical changes. As Project 2 advances, the temporal dimension of human inequality will eventually require extended attention. The World Historical Research Design presented here proposes comprehensive study of the period after 1500, but the earlier structures of human society presumably reinforce inequality today, and Project 2 must make appropriate assumptions about them for its post-1500 analysis. The earlier patterns, whether socially constructed or biologically evolved, can be studied only with smaller amounts of data and different research techniques. Two groups of researchers, the Institute for Research on World Systems, IROS, and CESHAT, Global History Data Bank, are working in different ways on the questions of earlier configurations that reinforce inequality today, as developed in cities, states, and agricultural life. Other scholars are producing important work on processes of social evolution in early human societies, where social evolution is defined in a variety of ways. And the International Institute of Social History contributes substantial expertise on the period after 1500. The full task of Project 2 is to combine the results of the global studies of the post-1500 era with the smaller but essential studies on inequality before 1500 to create a fully historical picture of human inequality. From that basis, Project 3 can seriously address the exploration of human-natural interactions. Natural scientists have already made substantial advances in ecological studies and in analysis of the human genome. Further research will explore how human inequality influences segments of the environment, and inversely, how rising sea levels and depletion of oceanic phytoplankton populations affect human society. As the data collection, editing, and analysis of Project 2 become more developed, it will become wise for historians and other social scientists to imagine themselves also joining Project 3, a collaborative effort to better understand the interplay of humanity and the natural world. Thinking about this objective may enable individuals to identify small pieces of this large project to which they can work productively. Finally, there's a question of policy formulation and implementation regarding these two crises. This is a different and difficult issue. In particular, there has been substantial public and official rejection of scientific knowledge in many parts of the world, notably on climate and other environmental issues, but also on questions of social discrimination. If the three projects combine their efforts and succeed in reporting their research results, we do not know how they will be received. Public opinion, popular culture, and the influence of entrenched interests are complex and important issues, and they are clearly beyond the scope of this study. We must recognize that this big question exists, but we cannot presume to answer it. Meanwhile, it does seem that historians have a professional interest in pursuing research to develop knowledge on these evident terrestrial crises. We need verified interpretations of social processes involving inequality. We need interpretations of the functioning of the spheres of the terrestrial system, and we need to know about the interaction of these processes on our globe. I encourage you to join me in expanding our knowledge of these issues. Thank you.